شريف ممكن تحط عايز اللينك فين؟
I guess it's already خلاص it's already
Okay,
streamed.
we'll send
Looks like
it
we're
to you.
streaming live.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Amal Mahmoud, Managing Director of Diwan BookStores. I'm very glad to have you all joining us today to our very first webinar of many to come, inshallah. This series of webinar with Enneagram Masters that Diwan will be hosting came after a long and fruitful collaboration between Diwan BookStores and Egyptian affiliate of the International Enneagram Association. During this collaboration, we have been able to bring to our bookstores many important Enneagram Masters that came and did our many book signing events in our bookstores. So we're very excited to have with us today Mario Sikora, who's joining us from his home in Philadelphia. He's the co-author of Awareness to Action, the Enneagram, Emotional Intelligence and Change, which Diwan has the honor to have published the Middle East edition. Mario is the president and founder of Awareness to Action International and an executive coach. For over 20 years, he has been advising leaders in many organizations across the globe. And most of all, he's a very dear friend of Diwan BookStores. Today in this webinar, Mario will be answering these important questions. What specific qualities, actions, and leadership behavior and skills are essential for individuals and leaders of organizations to undergo and to demonstrate in these hard times? We are also glad to have with us today two key Enneagram figures in Egypt to be the co-hosts to discuss this topic with Mario. Our first co-host for this session is Tamer Zanati, who is an executive coach, facilitator, and trainer, and the vice president of Awareness to Action International. He's also the managing director of Powerhouse Consulting and Training, and he's the president of the Egyptian affiliate of the International Enneagram Association and a member of the global board of the same association. His main mission in life is to support leaders to transform their leadership skills and to transform the life of many, and to transform the life we are living into the life that the humankind deserves to live. Our second co-host is Ahmed Dessouqi, who is an Egyptian architect, 30 years of experience as a designer, a project manager, and as a consultant for local and multinational organizations in many fields of the construction industry. In his human development capacity, Ahmed has more than 12 years of experience as a corporate trainer, coach, and human capacity building expert. He's an Enneagram teacher and accredited professional from International Enneagram Association. Ahmed is the vice president of the Egyptian affiliate of the IEA Global. I haven't said the word Enneagram and the association so many times in this short period. So I'm very happy. I will turn to Tamer Zanati to take it from there, and I'll just lay back and relax and enjoy this very amazing webinar. Thank you for coming, Mario. Thank you, Tamer. Thank you, Ahmed, for being here with us. And we're very happy. Thank you. Please go.
Thank you so much, Amal. My pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Amal.
There's also one more thing I would like to announce, that we'll be writing in the chat box a promo code that you can use to buy the Awareness to Action book from Diwan BookStores and from the website, and it's valid for a week for everyone who's attending this webinar. Thank you all. Have a great webinar.
Thank you so much, Amal. Thank you for this nice introduction. And we're really happy and proud of the collaboration between IEA Egypt affiliate and Diwan BookStores. That was really since the beginning of inception of the Egyptian affiliate. We had many events together. Diwan BookStores helped the community to bring the main Enneagram books that were not available before our cooperation, that reached so far, I guess, 11 or 12 titles on the bookshelves of Diwan, to the extent that Diwan has named a category in its bookstores, name of the Enneagram, which is something that we love very much. So we really would like to keep on collaborating with Diwan and going into new ventures like this one, where we would like to bring lots of authors of main books of Enneagram to the Egyptian community, so they can really interact with, understand more from them what's behind the words inside the pages of their books. And the first one is Mario Sikora with his book, famous book, Awareness to Action. That was one of the first books that entered the Egyptian market with few of other Enneagram books. So thank you very much, Mario, for accepting our invitation for this Enneagram. We are really glad to have you with us.
It's my pleasure. Always happy to do it.
Yeah. I would like to set some very quick things just to shape the discussions as we go. For the audience attending by Zoom or through our social media pages, because it's streamed on Diwan BookStore's Facebook page, as well as the link is published on IA Egypt Facebook page as well. So you can send your questions through the chat box of Zoom if you're attending in Zoom, or as comment on the post on the Diwan BookStore's page. And we'll make sure at the right time we'll bring some of your questions when it's possible to Mario, so he can answer these questions. So we'd like to wish you an enjoyable evening with this webinar and with Mario Sikora. I don't know, Ahmed, do you like to say anything before I start shooting my questions?
Actually, I can start with my first question directly to Mario, which is what's keeping him busy these days? I mean, what's the big idea or ideas or things that consumes his his energy, takes his attention? He's very much aware of it these days and doing a lot of things to handle. Yeah.
Sure. So you wanted to start with the small talk, huh?
Yeah, the small one.
Okay. So there are a number of, first of all, let me say it's a pleasure to be here. First of all, with both of you, and as you know, I have a fondness in my heart for Cairo and particularly for Diwan BookStore. So it's an honor for me to be participating in this activity. So thank you for the invitation, and thank you for having me here. So with the what's keeping me awake at night, I guess if we get past all of the the aspects of the crises that we're facing, and that's causing stress for everyone else, if we think about what in terms of theory am I thinking about, or application of the Enneagram, there's a couple of things. So the first thing I would say is, given that we are in such a time of change, the big question for me is, how do we use this material to help people adapt? Okay, adaptability is the key quality. I've always felt that adaptability is one of the key qualities that leaders need to have, right? There are no magic set of skills for leaders that transfer to every situation, right? Somebody can be a very successful leader in one situation, but those same set of skills or abilities may lead to failure in another situation. So being able to adapt, being able to recognize what is required at in the given moment is critical for leaders. And I think it's even more critical for us now, right? But not just leaders, for individuals. As we all know, we're facing challenges in the workplace. We're facing challenges, and so many people out of work. How am I going to make a living? And the Enneagram, one of the things that the Enneagram points out to us is that we tend to get stuck in habitual ways of understanding the world, which is the opposite of adaptability. Okay. And what I tried to do with the awareness to action approach to the Enneagram is teach people how to continue to challenge their assumptions about the world. I think after we discuss this question, we can talk a little bit about the Enneagram and what it is. But my perspective of it is that it is these 9 strategies for interacting with the world. And we can get locked into an interpretation of the strategy that limits our ability to adapt. We try to solve new problems in old ways. So for me, the question is, how can we continue to adapt? How can we take an even more urgent approach to being flexible and adaptive? And in what areas in particular do we need to adapt? Now, if you're familiar with my work, you understand my emphasis on the three instinctual biases, okay, the preserving domain, the navigating domain, and the transmitting domain. My view is that we are all kind of being forced into a heavy focus on the preserving domain these days. Okay? What keeps me awake at night is what happens when people start to have a little bit of crises in the navigating domain, which is all about meaning, which is all about identity, which is all about status and role. What happens when my job changes? What happens when I lose my job? How do leaders set a course with clarity in the face of uncertainty? These are all things that speak to insecurities in the navigating domain. And I think these are the skills that leaders are going to have to get really good at. How do I make sense of the world for people so that we can adapt to what's happening to us?
Since you already, jumped in the middle of the topic, I guess it would be good for our audience, Mario, to listen from you a quick overview of the Enneagram system, the way you, and especially your approach to the Enneagram, so they can really relate to whatever questions that we will ask after that.
Sure. So the word Enneagram is Greek. Ennea means 9, gram means drawing. So it's a diagram with 9 points and 9 intersecting lines. And over time, people started attributing personality characteristics to this diagram. Okay, so the diagram existed first, and then people started mapping personality characteristics based on their observations, their empirical observations of people. There's a lot of debate over when this all started, and who should get credit for starting this system. I'm not really interested in that debate because I see it as kind of an open source system. What I feel comfortable saying is that as a personality model, it started in the late 1960s or early 1970s in South America through a Bolivian teacher named Oscar Ichazo. It was then, the system was then advanced by another South American from Chile named Claudio Naranjo. And he was a psychiatrist who added a lot of depth to what he learned from Ichazo. Since then, other people have taken their work and expanded on it. In some places revised it, in some places modified it, but I like to think expanded on it and added new textures. One of the things, I was introduced to the Enneagram in 1994 by Robert Tallon, who's the co-author of my book, Awareness to Action. And Robert had been studying with Don Riso and Russ Hudson at the time, two of the great Enneagram teachers. Russ is obviously still very active. Don passed away a few years ago. So I learned the Riso-Hudson model and did trainings with Don and Russ, and I'm still friends and on occasion teach with Russ these days. But I was one of the early people to start using the Enneagram in organizations. Okay, there were a few people who were doing it at the time. And what I found is that the Enneagram as it existed, as great a model as it was, the language tended to be highly spiritual and highly psychological. And so I needed to start revising the model a little bit, or at least languaging in a different way so it would appeal to the corporate audience. Now, as far as what the Enneagram specifically is, I like to think of it actually as two personality models blended together. Okay. The first part of it is what are called the 3 instinctual biases. Other people refer to them as instincts or subtypes, but there are these 3 categories of motivations. There are these 3 categories of attention to fundamental areas of life. And for me, they're the preserving domain, which is all about nesting and nurturing and security and safety and resources. There's the navigating domain, which is all about relationships and identity and purpose and status and organizational politics. And then there's the transmitting domain, which is all about how do I attract the attention of someone else so that I can either pass my genes to them or my ideas. Now, these three instinctual biases are focuses of attention, what we value in a sense, not ethical or moral values, but biological values. Now, the 9 Enneagram types, as I understand them, are rooted in strategies for satisfying these values. Okay, so the instinctual biases are what's important to me, and the strategies, or the 9 types, are how I go about satisfying those values. So at the heart of each of these is a strategy rooted in a desire to feel a certain way. So each of us is striving to feel something. So my personality type is the Enneagram type 8, striving to feel powerful. So the way I get my needs met is by doing things that make me feel powerful. Okay. Tamara, I know that your Enneagram type is striving to feel peaceful at 0.9. So you go after trying to satisfy your needs in a way that is through peacefulness. And Ahmed, I believe you're an Enneagram type 5, as I recall. And so the strategy at 0.5 is striving to feel detached. How can I kind of keep a little bit of a buffer between me and my experience so that I can observe it and understand it and process it? Okay, so 3 very different approaches to interacting with the world. What happens with these strategies is they become, they're deeply rooted in us, and they become the source of our habitual strengths and our habitual problematic behaviors, right? So I like to tell people I've been, with my wife for going on 25 years now, and I never surprise her when it comes to my dysfunction, right? I still do the same goofy things that I did 25 years ago, but I do them less. I don't do them as extremely, but they're all fitting with this strategy of striving to feel powerful and how it gets me into trouble.
Can I extend this talk to
Sure.
a little bit further? The Enneagram in its early rise by Oscar Chazo and Naranjo, it was meant, as they said, not to be for the public. Mm-hmm. It's for the private. It's for the elite. It's for some selected people who can use it wisely for the right purpose, for the right goal, and so on. But for some reason, it leaked out, and since then it starts to leak and leak and leak, and then now it's for everyone. It's for the public. Mm-hmm. Apparently, they were afraid of some misuse of the Enneagram, some unsafe use of the Enneagram due to the secrets of the Enneagram or whatever they were thinking about.
Right.
So my first question is, do you think that there are secrets in the Enneagram? When you misuse them, it's going to be harmful? Is there a harmful application of Enneagram? I know that your application is very safe, very practical, down to earth. I mean, it's practical, it's hands-on, it's focused on the deliverable outcome, and so on. So do you think that there are some people who misuse the Enneagram or the secrets of the Enneagram to manipulate people or to misguide people or to mislead people or to do harm for people?
I think that there are people who can use the Enneagram in a way that does do damage to people. But if they weren't using the Enneagram to do it, they would use some other tool to do it, right? In my view. So for me, the Enneagram, I know that a lot of people like to see it as something very sacred and special and elevated. I'm a pragmatist, and for me, it's a tool. Okay, just like any other spiritual tool or psychological tool or intellectual tool, and a tool is value neutral, right? It's the person wielding the tool that either uses it for good or for evil. Okay, for me, the Enneagram, and I'm sorry if people don't like this analogy, but it's like a hammer. Okay. And that reflects my personality type, of course, the type 8. You can use a hammer for good, or you can use a hammer for bad. And yes, I see people using the Enneagram to stereotype people, to use it as an attempt to highlight people's insecurities and then take advantage of them. Okay. But again, my view is that if they weren't using the Enneagram to do that, they would just be doing it in a different way. So I honestly do not see any value in keeping something secret if it's going to help people. Okay. For me, that to say, oh, this is not for the average person because they're not capable of handling it, to me, that just strikes me as elitist and, a little bit arrogant, quite frankly.
Okay, so
Okay.
very interesting point of view. Which would, because you're always, Mario, taking a practical and pragmatic approach to the Enneagram compared to other approaches. Let me ask you, along your journey with the Enneagram, especially from the time, I understand that this book is written in the late 90s or maybe early.
We started it in 2001.
Okay,
yeah.
So it's almost like 19 years since then.
Yeah,
so
20 years, yeah, almost 20 years, yeah.
So what happened throughout this period? I mean, do you still see the Enneagram the same way when you started to write this book? What has developed in your specific approach and in the Enneagram world in general?
Wow. Okay. So let me start with my approach. Okay. And then we can talk about the Enneagram world in general, because that's a big topic. So when we wrote Awareness to Action, it took us, I think, 4 or 5 years to finish the book. And there were a couple of factors. It's interesting. We were actually negotiating with a publisher to come up with a contract to write the book when 9/11 happened in 2001, right? And and the publisher at the time told us they were canceling all book contracts and not proceeding with anything because of the situation the country was in. So so we ended up having it published through a small university, but the book was kind of an exercise in developing a way of talking about the Enneagram that would appeal to our clients. One of the things I wrestled with at the time was that there was no clear definition of what it meant to be a particular type that I felt was useful. Okay. Now, as we know, the Enneagram was originally rooted in the 7 deadly sins plus 2. And so you could say that the 8 was the lust type, and the 9 was the sloth type, and the 5 was the avarice type, and so forth. That's not really corporate friendly language. And it's also not value neutral, right? I mean, it has a sort of negative connotation. It's not to say that it's wrong. I certainly, I certainly see that these are truths about people of these personality styles. But for me, it didn't serve as a useful definition. So we started thinking about, okay, how can we really define what it means to be an 8 or a 9 or a 5 or a 1 in a way that people understand? And that's how we came up with the idea of the strategies. Okay, it's rooted in a desire to feel a certain way that shapes the way we think about the world, that shapes the way we behave about the world. So if somebody asks me, what does it mean? What does it mean when I talk about a type 9? I say, well, that's somebody whose preferred strategy is striving to feel peaceful. And my clients understand that, right? The beauty of these words is that they can say, oh, okay, well, I can get what that means. I know if somebody's striving to feel peaceful, I don't have to memorize all the details of the Enneagram. I can kind of get a sense of what it means. Very different from somebody who's striving to feel powerful. I mean, just by understanding those 2 phrases, you can understand that these are 2 very different people. Okay, so that was one thing that we wanted to focus on. The other thing is we were trying to think of how do we talk about these types in a way that hadn't been done before. And that's when we came up with the idea of tying it to the emotional competencies. okay, which is at the heart of this book. When you look at the three, how do they do in self-awareness? How do they do in self-management? How do they do in empathy and so forth? It was just a different way to talk about the types that hadn't been done before, okay? So we took Daniel Goleman's list of, I think, 24 or 25 emotional competencies, and we boiled it down to 16 because we felt some of them were redundant. And we started describing the Enneagram types in those terms. Now, what has evolved about my work? The most important thing is my understanding of the instinctual biases. Okay? When I learned the Enneagram, there was the talk about these subtypes. I always found the descriptions of the three subtypes, the three instinctual variants, to be a little bit problematic, because the terminology then, and I would argue even today, that most people have, are just not scientifically valid. Okay, so I have tried to come up with a way of thinking about the three subtypes or the three instinctual biases in a way that resonates with what we know about human nature through science. Okay? So that's a big part of it. There are also some things that I've added to the model that are not in the book, such as the 9 core qualities, the 9 accelerators, which are developmental activities for each of the types, and also the leadership model that we've developed that's related to the Enneagram. So those are kind of how my work has evolved over time, to get a deeper understanding of not just the types, but the instinctual biases and some of these other aspects of it that we talked about.
Yeah, and as far as I remember, Mario, that in the Middle Eastern edition, which is available at Diwan bookstores, you have made minor changes in addition to adding an annex about the instinctual biases that was not in the original edition.
Correct. Yeah.
So as far as I remember, the term striving to be that was the term that you used for each strategy. Now in the new edition, is striving to feel instead.
Right.
Would you explain what is the real difference between these two approaches or terminologies?
Yeah, so you're right. That is one of the changes. And for me, my background is in writing and editing, and also in philosophy and theology. So I'm kind of a stickler for words and precision around words. And striving to be, as a term, I was striving to be powerful. It would give the people the impression that there was a cognitive element to this, that we were consciously making an effort to do something, okay, or to become something. And we would also have people say, well, I'm not striving to be peaceful, I am peaceful, or I'm not striving to be detached, I am detached, okay, and so I've accomplished it. And they would kind of lend them to be stuck. The more I learned about human nature, the more I realized how driven we are by feelings. Right? There's so much that goes on in our psyche that is not at the cognitive level, but it's at the feeling level. It's at the emotional level. And I really think that these strategies are rooted in a feeling need, okay, that shapes the way we think, that shapes the way we behave, but it's a regulatory tool. Right? Our feelings are regulatory tools. I feel hungry, and that tells me to go eat. I feel cold, and that drives me to seek warmth. I feel a need for power that drives me to exercise power in my environment as a way of managing it or taking control of it. So I really wanted to highlight that these are rooted in feelings and not some sort of cognitive approach to the world. You had asked me about changes in the community too. Do you want me to go back to that one? It's an interesting question.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that would be interesting. Especially just to qualify this, that the landscape now in the Enneagram world is different than 19 years ago. I mean, the founders or the starters of the big ideas. Not now in the landscape, like Ichazo, like Naranjo, like Dr. Daniels, like others.
Yeah. 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 So when I was introduced to the Enneagram in 1994, there were a handful of books on the Enneagram, right? And the internet may have existed, but it certainly wasn't something that we had access to. So in order to learn about the Enneagram then, there were, a dozen or two books that you could find, and I read all of them, right? I got my hands on everything I could. And there were a handful of people doing workshops on the Enneagram, like Don and Russ at the Enneagram Institute, and Helen and David with the narrative tradition, Tom Condon, Jerry Wagner. But the Enneagram was kind of centralized, right? There were a number of main teachers, and there were a couple of, a number of main schools, and everybody sort of derived from there. And if you wanted to learn about the Enneagram, there was sort of a centralized group of, original sources. We live in a very different time now. You can Google Enneagram and find an endless list of resources, right? You can find, I have seen people who create Enneagram memes on Facebook or Instagram and have hundreds of thousands of followers, right? So the Enneagram, one of the beauties of the Enneagram is that it's an open source system. There is no the Enneagram, right? There is no official Enneagram, even though some people think that, there is. But the reality is it's an open source system, which is good because people can come up with their own innovations, but it's also bad because people can read a book and then position themselves as an Enneagram teacher when they have no real knowledge, right? So the challenge of the Enneagram as it is today is that we really have to exercise, caveat emptor, or buyer beware. We have to be really careful about who we're learning from, what their knowledge is, what their training is, what their ethics are. And I think this is why the IEA is such an important organization, because it becomes a self-governing body for teachers to be held to ethical responsibility for the Enneagram. So the good thing about the Enneagram today is that it's more widely spread. Every so often I listen to a podcast interview and, of some musician or some actor who will make reference to the Enneagram. So it's coming up more and more in the public knowledge, but it's very hard to control the quality of teaching of the Enneagram. And there's danger to that.
Okay. I have a question here coming from Marwa Saleh. I can bring some questions from the participants. Mm-hmm. So the question is, how would the Enneagram help organizations in the current situation? And what do you think is the role of trainers, coaches that work with the Enneagram to help organizations?
So the Enneagram it's a descriptive model and it's a prescriptive model. Okay, and what I mean by that is that it describes human nature so that we can recognize patterns in ourselves and patterns in other people. And it's a prescriptive model in the sense that if I know my Enneagram type, I have some sense of what the things I need to work on are. Right? I've been using the Enneagram as an executive coach and consultant for 23 years now. Wow. When I work with 8s, I see the same things over and over again. And when I work with 5s, I see the same things over and over again. And with 1s, the same things over and over again. So it helps us to understand, here's a pattern I'm seeing. Now it creates kind of a problem resolution protocol for us. Once I see what the problem is, I know what solution to try first, okay? Rather than trying multiple solutions, right? I always use the example if, there's problem with the internet, we call the internet provider, and the first thing they always say is, reboot your system, right? Turn it off and turn it back on. And they say that because it fixes most of the problems. The Enneagram can provide in a similar way solutions quickly for people once we understand their Enneagram type. Now, it doesn't mean that that immediate solution will always fix the problem, but we may have to go to step 2 on the protocol and step 3, depending, but at least it gives us a protocol. So the Enneagram provides a map for many different organizational activities. It can be at the individual level. If I'm working with an individual leader or an individual person, I can, by understanding their Enneagram type, I can help them grow more effectively, more efficiently, and faster. Okay. If I'm working with a team, I can understand, okay, what are the dynamics on this team? If I look at the people on my screen right now, there's me, there's Tamara, there's Ahmed. I know we've got an 8, we've got a 9, we've got a 5, and that there will be kind of expected dynamics at play there. And if we keep in mind, oh, well, Ahmed is striving to feel detached, and Tamara's striving to feel peaceful, and Mario is striving to feel powerful, we can understand why there are the conflicts that we're likely to see. And when we understand where they come from, not only can we resolve them more quickly, but we can exercise compassion. Okay? And this, for me, is one of the fundamental uses of the Enneagram in organizations, is to create compassion and understanding between coworkers. Because when, Tamara and I work together, right? We do business together. And when Tamara is doing his 9 stuff, I don't get angry. Oh, there goes Tamara again. I say, well, this is what 9s do. Just like I do my 8 stuff. And I can guarantee you he has far more reason to be frustrated with me than I do with him, because my 8 stuff can be pretty tough to deal with, but it allows him to be compassionate, because he can say, it's not Mario being a jerk. It's just Mario stuck in his 8-ness, and he'll get over it eventually, right? So this is, some of the fundamental applications. It can also help us with, understanding, roadblocks that we run into when it comes to different projects or different tasks. What are the sources of those roadblocks? As far as the consultant or the trainer is concerned, that's going to depend on what they're trying to solve, right? If it's an executive coach, there's one set of solutions. If it's somebody do team building, it's another set of solutions they can apply. But for me, the real value of the Enneagram is understanding why people act the way they do, why they can get stuck in a pattern, and how we can help them get out of that pattern by understanding the pattern that they're in, right? If we don't understand what pattern we're in, we can't get out of it.
Yeah, I mean, thank you very much for this explanation, which is bringing a question to mind about the differences between people, especially at work. So what you're saying here is cultivating compassion toward each other, understanding the differences between us. But it doesn't, I mean, most of the time it doesn't come automatically. So what do you recommend? What practices, what tips do you give to professionals, especially leaders, to turn from being judgmental or getting into conflicts because of the differences into cultivating compassion and integrating and working in teams due to differences as well?
Yeah. So part of that is attitudinal, right? We have to cultivate an attitude of being willing to forgive people for being who they are and being willing to be compassionate toward people. We always have to understand that any attempt to change is not like flipping a light switch, right? I don't decide, okay, I'm going to start exercising tomorrow and it's going to come easy and I'm going to exercise every day after that, right? Every attempt to change has fits and starts, meaning I start, I fail, I start again, I fail again, I keep going until I have success. It's the same thing with our behaviors. There's always going to be falling back into the old patterns, and we always have to remember to get back up. We're always going to be reactive, right? No matter how much I understand people's nature, I still lose my temper sometimes, right? But I lose it less than I used to. So for me, the goal in helping people to really change is by clearly establishing a goal for change and then remembering that I will always fail, okay, or I will eventually fail. And when I do fail, the sooner I recognize that I failed, the more quickly I can correct the situation. So when I work with people, I always tell them, don't try to be a different person. Work on increasing the speed in which you recognize that you did an old behavior that's problematic. And when you realize it, so reduce the speed between, or the, let me put it this way, reduce the amount of time that passes between when I do my old problematic behavior and when I recognize that I did the old problematic behavior, and work on shrinking that time. Okay, that is the path to growth. Now, the key thing is that we have to establish clear action plans. Okay, this is the problem. I shouldn't say this is the problem. This is something that many times is missing in work with the Enneagram, is that people talk about understanding themselves, about understanding other people, but they don't create action plans for what they're going to do differently, right? So you have to write down, I'm going to do this instead of doing this, okay? And then you have to measure your behavior, and you have to check that every day and make sure that you're making progress, okay? So for me, it's an attitudinal thing of not expecting immediate change and then having a disciplined action plan that you measure yourself against. Okay? Now, there's a piece in there that is critically important that I didn't mention, okay? And this is what we call the authenticity stage in the book, Awareness to Action. And that authenticity stage is recognizing the internal conflict that comes up whenever we try to change, and how that internal conflict is related to our definition of our strategy. And that if I want to really make change stick, I have to find a way to change my story about what it means to be powerful in a way that allows me to incorporate this new behavior. Because if I don't deal with my narrative about power, that change will never stay. Does that make sense?
A lot of sense, and then I like this discussion, and it also inspired me with a question related to resisting change, because resisting change for an individual is different from resisting change from an organizational perspective. So, and people create the change in the organization, but so how does this relate? I mean, the Robert Kagan terminology of the immunity of the immunity to change that exists in the organization. How does the resisting change in the organization collectively is related to resisting change in the individual?
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned Keegan's work, because this immunity to change work is exactly what I was talking about when it comes to rewriting the narrative. Right. So he talks about these, I think he calls them competing commitments that come up whenever we try to change. So in the same way that the individual needs to rewrite their narrative, if a group wants to change, they have to expose their implicit narratives about the issue that they're trying to change. A group takes on a culture. Okay, culture is really just personality at a group level. Okay, and even though you can have people of different personality styles in that group, there will be a group overlay, right? As we know, Egyptian culture is very different from US culture. Okay, and so there are certain ways of viewing the world that are common to Egyptians that are foreign to people in the US, and vice versa. Okay, So the same thing applies at a team level and organizational level. There are narratives, implicit narratives that have taken hold and that cause immunity to change, right? It's like when you implant an organ into someone or transplant an organ, but it's the wrong blood type and the body just rejects it. Okay, so in order to get an organization to change, you have to work with the group to expose these implicit narratives, usually that people aren't even aware of, right? And then find a way to rewrite those strategies in a similar way that you would do it on an individual level and allow it to incorporate these new behaviors. So I find that that's a really effective exercise to do with teams. I even at times have, what I'll do is if I'm working with a team, I'll have them come up with a list of adjectives that they feel describes the team personality. And you'll often look at this list of adjectives and you'll see an Enneagram type there, right? It might be a 4, it might be an 8, might be a 9. And so that can give you something to work with when it comes to working with the implicit team narratives that way.
Interesting. Yeah.
Going back to the to what you have in the book, there is, I mean, the awareness to action, which is like what we discussed most of the time since we started this webinar. And there is another element, which is in the subtitle, which is the emotional intelligence. And you told us in the very beginning that you took the 24 aspects of emotional intelligence, reduced them to 16, and you started to work on that. So can you tell us how did this process go? How did you come up with the 16 out of the 14? What did you eliminate? What was the priority? And actually the second part of the question, what is the reason that we don't see any more talks about emotional intelligence in your writings or in your books following the Awareness to Action book?
Yeah. So as far as the first part of your question, I have to say it's been 20 years since we wrote the book. So I don't remember what I had for lunch yesterday. So I'm not quite sure which of Goleman's competencies that we left out. But I do recall that the reason is that we simply felt that I think at the time he had 25, and he has reduced his number since his original book. So even he thought he had too many, I think. So so number one, it was just too many, but we also felt that some of them were simply redundant, right? Or they overlapped. And so we combined it. I've always had a desire to boil things down as much as possible, right? There's the Einstein quote about making things as simple as possible, but no simpler. For me, whenever we get beyond the number 3, I start to lose focus. Okay, so you know, the idea that we had 16 emotional competencies for me was quite an achievement that I managed to maintain focus, you know, for that long. So I think that the ones we picked were the ones that we felt were most relevant, particularly to the workplace. So that was our rationale. Okay, now when it comes to why don't I emphasize it as much anymore, it gets back to that idea of simplicity. So when I am working with clients, these are people who are very busy and who want things that are simple and memorable. And so I always try to keep things as tight as possible. The 16 emotional competencies are good background information, right? So my clients can read it and then say, this is one that I need to work on, or this is one that I need to work on. So for me, I don't want to, you know, make them think about all 16. I want them to focus on the issues that they need to work on, right? So I don't spend a lot of time focusing all 16. Now, emotional intelligence is, when it comes down to it, it's the ability to recognize our emotional states and manage our responses to those emotional states. It's the ability to recognize the emotional states that we see in other people and manage our emotional reaction to them. Okay. For me, that's what you need to remember about emotional intelligence. Okay. What is happening to me? Am I angry? Am I sad? Am I feeling shame? Am I feeling fear? Okay. Now, how do I manage my reaction to that? Same thing when I interact with other people. What are they sharing? What are they giving off? Okay. Is it fear? Is it anger? Okay. Let me manage my reaction to that. Let me not be sucked into an argument with somebody just because they are angry. So for me, boiling the emotional intelligence is down to that is a great starting point. And if the client needs to go deeper into something specific, that comes up as a developmental area. Okay. And then I'll deal with it on the case. If, for example, self-awareness is a problem for them, then we'll work on that. If empathy is a problem for them, then we'll work on it. But I don't see a lot of value necessarily or need to walk people through this whole list of 16 emotional competencies, whether they're relevant or not. Okay. So emotional intelligence is a foundationally important concept, but it's just too much to go through 16 emotional competencies with executives. Okay. Another thing, frankly, in the United States, emotional intelligence was a really hot and important idea in the early 2000s, but since then it has kind of died down in popularity. People know that it's important, but they often feel like, oh yeah, we already did emotional intelligence. Okay, so I don't emphasize it as much.
Yeah, I like to address this focal idea that it's not the first time that I listen to this idea from you about simplicity and making things in less steps. I mean, instead of putting too much elements or too much steps into the things, making it in the least possible number of steps or elements.
Yes. Yes.
And this is raising a question for me about the 27 subtypes. This is one of the things that is, I mean, really for many people, if they are not specialized in the Enneagram or only using the Enneagram for their own life or for their business, it's really tough to remember and really tough to navigate. So how did you address this challenge? I mean, coming from the simplicity angle that you were always promoting.
Yeah. So the, very often when people are going through an Enneagram training, they're seeking to become experts in the Enneagram, right? So we do a certification program, Tamer. And by the way, the next one's coming up starting on June 29th. You can go to awareness-to-action.com for more information about the certification program. But when somebody's going through a certification program, they're looking to become experts in the Enneagram. So you have to teach them all 27 subtypes. You have to go into the detail about them. Why is a preserving 3 different from a navigating 3, from a transmitting 3, and what does that look like? But most of the clients that I work with are not seeking to become Enneagram experts. They're seeking tools that they can apply and use. So when we talk about the strategies, I don't expect people to remember all the details of all 9 types, but if they can remember, oh yeah, Tamer is striving to feel peaceful, and and Ahmed is striving to feel detached. Okay, I understand what that means. I can infer what I need to know. And then if I have to know more, I go to the book and I read, okay, let me read more about these type 9s. Okay, that's what these people are looking for. They're not looking for deep expertise. Okay, now practitioners are. So when it comes to the 27 subtypes, what we have to remember is that there are 9 strategies, and I can maybe remember all 9 if I work at it, okay? But at least I can remember the important ones, mine, my wife's, my boss's, my coworker. And then I have to remember that there are 3 instinctual biases: preserving, navigating, and transmitting. And when you put those 2 things together, you get a descriptor from which I can infer things. So if, for example, we remember that Mario is a navigating 8, we can remember he's striving to feel powerful and he's navigating. So what's that going to look like? Okay. If you're a reasonably intelligent person, you can kind of figure it out. And if you need to, you can go to the book and find more details. If I'm thinking somebody's a transmitting 9, okay, what does that mean? Okay, this and this. All right, I get it. If I need more, I can go to the book. Okay. So for me, it's kind of getting the right first principles in place that people can then extrapolate from in more and more detail. So the way I think about the Enneagram is that it's like an iceberg in the water. And what most people need to know is the part of the iceberg that's above the waterline, right? My clients, that's what I want them to know. But people who are practitioners like us, we need to know everything that's under the surface. Okay? But to our clients, they don't need to know everything that's under the surface, right? They don't care about everything that's under the surface unless they really need to know it. So that's the way I think about it. What does my client need to know versus what do I, as a practitioner, need to know? And that's the big difference. Now, I want to be clear here that just because something is simple does not mean it's simplistic, right? There's a saying in Zen Buddhism that it's easy to become enlightened. All you have to do is sit up straight and breathe. And in 20 years of practice, you'll become enlightened, right? So the mechanisms are simple, but the work is difficult, okay? And even, a Zen teacher who keeps emphasizing these simple elements still does a lifetime of study to truly understand those simple elements, right? So I'm all too happy to talk about all the deep parts of the Enneagram, all the spiritual aspects of it, all the philosophical aspects of it. That's important for me to know. It's not important for my clients to know unless they want to become Enneagram experts.
Okay, so let's take a question from the floor. We have Marwa Saleh is asking a question saying, what challenges have you faced while working with the Enneagram in organizations, and how have you handled them?
Yeah. So a lot of people are nervous about using the Enneagram in organizations, and I think there's good reason for that, right? The diagram itself looks kind of weird, right? And people say, what the heck is that? The name is not, it's not a branding dream, right? Enneagram's a little difficult. People don't know how to pronounce it when they see it. So it can be a little intimidating. And then the other thing is that the way that it's very often taught is either has an emphasis on spirituality or an emphasis on psychology, which again may not feel comfortable for people in the workplace. Okay, so there are some obstacles, I guess, depending on the way that you present the Enneagram, right? So if you present the Enneagram as this ancient system that came from the Sufis and all this other sort of mythology that people have, then yeah, people are not going to want to have anything to do with it in the corporate world. But if you go to them and say, look, I use this personality system. There's all kinds of personality systems. Most of them are already familiar with Myers-Briggs or DISC or, the Big Five. And I just say, the model I use is just like that. It's called the Enneagram. It identifies 9 different personality styles. And here's why I use it. I use it because I think it's the best personality model out there. And I think you'll think it's the best one too. And so we have to not be afraid of the Enneagram, but we have to present it in a way that's just, this is a system of understanding personality type, and there's lots of them, and here's the one I use. And people will accept it if they accept you. If you are credible, if you are ethical, if you are capable, then they will accept the Enneagram. But if you're not, then they'll reject the Enneagram because they reject you.
I think, Mario, also there is something regarding the language used in the Enneagram, and you have been done some work since you started with that regards. Would you just shed light on that?
Yeah, so the language, again, depending on the approach to the Enneagram, can be very spiritual or very psychological. And both of those things have dangers, particularly in the United States. Some other places, they don't necessarily. For example, spirituality is much more embraced in some cultures than it is in others. But in the United States, there are actually laws against or related to teaching spirituality or religion in organizations, right? And so human resource people don't want to have anything to do with something that sounds spiritual because it can get them into legal trouble or at least, ethical trouble in human resources. So we have to be very careful about that. When it comes to the psychological language, psychology often gets into issues of psychological health and psychological dysfunction, right? So a lot of times people will talk about a healthy 8 versus an unhealthy 8. And that's also very problematic in organizations. Okay? Most people teaching the Enneagram are not mental health professionals, so they should not be talking about whether somebody's psychologically healthy or not, because they don't have the skills and expertise to do that. The other thing is you don't want to go into an organization and start saying, well, the problem is that Tamer's, he's a type 9 who's just really unhealthy psychologically, and that's the problem, right? This is language that can get people fired or get people sued in organizations, right? So we have to be really careful about that. And so what we need then is an alternative language, a language that's not just simple, but also captures the ideas. So for example, we don't talk in the book about healthy, average, or unhealthy, but we talk about people when they're at their best, or typically, which is kind of in the middle. And then we talk about what they look like when they're under stress, because everybody can relate to being under stress. And everybody knows that, when I have a lot of stress, I'm not my best self. And I tend to, be difficult. So this is the way we prefer to talk about it. In my view, what we need to remember is that these are 9 strategies for interacting with the world, and we can use them effectively, or what psychologists would call adaptively, meaning that we use them in a way that makes us better people and makes other people suffer less, or we use them in maladaptive ways, which are ways that make us and the people around us suffer. And the goal in working with the Enneagram is to do more of the first, of using it in ways that is making the world a better place, making people happy, and using it less in the other way, which is causing trouble for people.
I have a specific question for transmitting 4. That this question is taking some prescription from. This comes from Ronnie, actually.
Okay.
So it says that
they're the worst. They're the worst. No, I'm kidding.
Because
I love Rania. No, of course.
According to some Enneagram teachers, transmitting 4 are the angriest type. Namely, maybe Naranjo and B, they consider this the transmitting 4 the angriest type of the Enneagram. Maybe mostly because they are misunderstood. And this state, this angry state, consumes a significant amount of their energy. So what's some actions specific for transmitting 4 to pull them out of this angry state that keeps them drained or anger or rage and so on?
Yeah. So the transmitting 4, so the 4 is someone who's striving to feel unique. Okay, that's the strategy, is that I want to experience the ways in which I am different from others. Okay, and the ways in which I am not understood, and the ways that I don't fit in. Okay, so what is it about me that makes me unique? Tends to be their fixation. The transmitting domain is all about how do I take whatever it is inside of me and get it out. Okay, And I can do this by, intense relationships with other people. I can do this by expressing myself through my art or my creations. Okay. So it's what happens inside of the transmitting four is this extreme desire to express their individuality, to express their uniqueness, and then frustration over the fact that they're not being appreciated. Okay. So that's what drives that anger. Okay. I'm not so sure that I would say they're the angriest type. I'm really not sure how to measure that, right? But they're absolutely very intense. Okay. They're very emotional. They can be very angry, and they can then break into tears and all these sort of things. In my view, if you really want to see a good depiction of the transmitting four, watch the movie about Steve Jobs with Michael Fassbender. Steve Jobs, there's a lot of speculation about what his Enneagram type is. If you read the book about him by Walter Isaacson, it is a textbook description of the transmitting four. They can feel tortured inside and so forth. Now, how does a transmitting four grow? What they need to do is to continue to work on redefining what it means to feel unique. Okay. And something I always challenge fours with is to stop being like every other four, okay, by striving so hard to be unique. Okay. To recognize that by gradually redefining what it means to be unique, I can start to get some inner peace. I can start to recognize that I am unique whether I express it or not. Every person comes into the world as an individual with different fingerprints and different footprints and different DNA and a different set of circumstances. So they have to learn to understand that whether I want to be or not, I am unique. Okay. And then they have to start redefining uniqueness. And very often they can grow in that by recognizing the behavior of other fours that they see and say, you know what, I'm just like that. And by being just like that, I'm not very unique. So let me try to go kind of a different direction. Instead of being an angry transmitting four, which means that I'm just like every other transmitting four, let me work on really being unique by being a transmitting four who's not so angry. Okay. And so we can work on the story gradually over time. And this is not, again, it's not flipping a switch. This is a lifetime's work. Okay. I have been working on rewriting what it means to be powerful for 22 years now. Okay. So it's just over and over and over again. And I'm finally starting to make a little bit of progress. So they have to continue with this. The other thing they want to do is learn to observe the ways in which they compare themselves to other people. This is something that haunts all fours, but particularly the transmitting fours. And learn to recognize when I compare myself to people and just label it. Don't try to change it. Don't feel bad about it. Don't try to do anything. Just label it. Oh, there I go again. I'm comparing myself to Ahmed. I'm comparing myself to Tamer. Oh, that's interesting. And this is where we get into a metacognitive state, where we're becoming aware, where we're starting to pay attention to our thinking, and that creates some distance between the emotion and our psyche. Okay, so those are the fundamental practices I recommend for particularly the transmitting four. Okay, recognize that I don't have to be like every other transmitting four, and I can be truly unique. Rewrite what it means to be unique, and then observe the tendency to compare and contrast with other people.
Yeah, easier said than done. So
like all of them. Look, this is, again, everybody wants a pill, right? And there are no pills. There are pills, but they don't work. This is hard work over time, and that's the only way change happens.
Yeah.
And sorry, go ahead.
Let me bring another question from the floor. From Magda Abdel Fattah. She's asking the question, can you please link the Enneagram to increasing employees' core competencies, if that is possible?
Yeah. So for me, the Enneagram is a model that depicts the obstacles we put in our own way for growth. Okay? So what I would use the Enneagram for, if an organization had a set of core competencies, for example, and most of them do, I would say, okay, say the core competency was, I don't know, better collaboration. Okay. So what we would do is look at how does the strategy create obstacles to embracing better collaboration skills, and then work on dismantling the obstacles. So for example, if we use, I'll pick on the 9 for a little bit, right? So if somebody is a type 9 and they need to be better at collaboration, we start to say, okay, well, what is it about your striving to feel peaceful that gets in the way of your ability to collaborate? What is it about your mindset around striving to feel peaceful that makes you reject this? And how can we change your mindset to help you understand that by being a more effective collaborator, you will actually get a better sense of peacefulness? This is the key thing. We have to help people see how they can get more of what they want, not make them feel like they're going to lose what they want. So when I'm working with a 9, I'm not trying to get them to not feel peaceful anymore. I'm trying to get them to be peaceful in a healthier way. Okay. So whatever the competency is, we have to kind of look at it through the lens of what is it about that person's expression or understanding of their enneatype is creating an obstacle. Remove that obstacle, or at least reduce it, and then give them a set of skills to practice, an action plan to become more collaborative. Okay, so it's always about using the Enneagram to identify the obstacle and moving that obstacle so that they can grow.
Well, I would say Magda is asking from a professional point of view. I mean, you gave the essence, but in practice, what do I need to do? Should I read a book? Should I attend the training? Should I bring a coach to do all of what you have said?
Yeah, well, there are different ways to skin a cat, right? I'm sorry, it's not a very nice expression, but it's a common one here. So it depends on what works for you, right? So there are certainly books that people can read, in emotional, in awareness to action. We talk about how each of the types can grow in particular emotional competencies. So that might be useful. Getting a coach is always good, but you certainly want to, if you're getting a coach who is using the Enneagram, you really want to make sure that they really understand the Enneagram. Okay, that would just be my key thing. Don't get somebody who learned the Enneagram 6 months ago and is now trying to help you, change. So yeah, from a tactical perspective, that's what I would recommend.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I can't resist asking the tough question, the hard questions. Back to the key word on the title of the book, which is awareness to action. And I feel that the word awareness might need some, digging deeper in it. What do we really mean by awareness? Do we really mean by it as the attention, paying attention all the time? Is it self-observation? Is it self-awareness? Is it metacognition, or thinking about awareness, or knowing that we are aware of things? So could you please dig deeper in the definition of this word? I mean, and is there a specific state of awareness that we reach up to and we keep rising, or it's a sinusoidal curve, we keep ups and downs, this kind of stuff?
Yeah, so awareness is one of those words like spirituality that means what you want it to mean, and it means different things to different people. Okay, awareness, I think, again, and I don't think there's a right answer to this. I can only talk about what I mean when I use the word. So what for me awareness is about has a number of components, And we want to pay attention to each of those components and not get fooled into thinking that awareness is just one thing, right? In NLP, which is not something I have any experience in, but I know that there are what are called big chunks and little chunks, right? And so a big chunk is this big overarching idea that can have lots of different meanings, whereas little chunks are more specific. Awareness can be kind of a big chunk word that when you start pulling on it, it doesn't really mean anything, right? So we have to say, okay, what exactly am I talking about when I'm talking about awareness here? So for me, there's a few different elements that I focus on. So number one is attention, okay? Am I paying attention? Where is my attention? Meaning, what aspects of my experience am I consciously and attentively experiencing? Right now, my attention is on this conversation. My attention is on my computer screen. But there are all sorts of things happening around me that I'm not aware of. So one might say at the moment, I'm very aware, but I'm only aware of certain things, okay? So what we want to do as a first step in developing awareness is to think of it in terms of, at a start, learning to discipline and direct our attention, meaning I direct my attention to where I want it to go. There are lots of ways to do this. Traditional mindfulness techniques that employ counting the breath, for example, or focusing on a candle, or repeating a mantra are ways of doing that. Okay. One of the ways I like to do it as a kind of a neat experience is to have my clients, or when I'm working with a group, to have them listen to music and focus on a different instrument each time they listen to a song. So the first time they listen to the piano, even though they're hearing the whole song, then they listen to it again, but they focus on the drums or they focus on the saxophone. So that's one way of trying to train and direct our attention. Okay, so that's one aspect of awareness. Then we can talk about self-awareness, which is kind of a general understanding of what my habitual patterns are. Okay. Oh, yes, I have a tendency to do this. I have a tendency to do that. And keeping those patterns of behavior, or our awareness of, or our knowledge of those patterns of attention fairly close to our consciousness. And we can do this by getting into a disciplined pattern of thinking about it repeatedly. Let me read about the type 8 again. Okay, maybe once a month I read about the type 8 to remind myself I happen to do that. And the closer to front of mind it is, the more I'll recognize it. Okay, so that is what is called internal self-awareness, meaning that I'm aware of my behaviors, my tendencies, my patterns. Then there's external self-awareness, which is what does Ahmed think of me? Okay? What does Tamer think of me? What do my coworkers think of me? What does my spouse think of me? Okay, so again, that's a knowledge aspect of self-awareness, meaning I'm aware of what they're doing. Now, there's also, you mentioned the word metacognition. Okay, that's kind of the observer that people talk about. That is thinking about our thinking. What am I thinking right now? Okay, how am I feeling about what I'm thinking? Okay, so an exercise in metacognition is, again, a different aspect of awareness, right? So for me, we have to be really aware that awareness is not one thing. There are multiple skills. Talking about awareness is like talking about basketball, okay? We can say, all right, I'm going to go play basketball today. Yeah, but that means I dribble the ball, I shoot the ball, I pass the ball, and all of those are aspects of awareness. Okay. Now, one thing I will say is that I think we have to be careful of expecting too much from ourselves when it comes to awareness. There are a lot of people who think we should try to be present or aware all the time. And what I always say to those people is good luck, right? Because it just ain't going to happen. It requires way too much energy. What we want to focus on is becoming skillful at being aware in all these ways that we've talked about when we need to be aware, and recognize that sometimes, my mind's just going to be drifting off thinking about, walking through a field with my wife or playing with my kids or whatever else, instead of thinking about, what is in front of me. That's just human nature. But we want to be able to get skillful at switching when I need to switch. Does that help?
So how can we develop those triggers? I know that you're talking about those triggers that brings us to the awakened or awareness state.
Yeah.
So those are triggers that need
Yeah.
to be developed either inside me or in my attitudes and behavior and
Yes.
habits, actually. So,
and this is where emotional intelligence is useful, right? Because like I said, emotional intelligence is recognizing our emotional states. And usually our emotions are early warning signs of trouble coming, okay? So when I work with people, one of the things I have them develop awareness of is their emotional states. I teach them to learn to name their emotions when they're feeling it, okay? So that, again, it steps outside of the emotion and lets us feel it. So when we get into the habit of recognizing anger or fear or shame or whatever emotion we're talking about, we get more effective at recognizing those triggers, okay? I start to feel my anger and I say, oh, I'm feeling anger. Let me calm down. Other times, if I'm not attuned to it, the anger takes over and I start acting from anger and I don't recognize it until all the damage is done. Okay. So the more I get, the more skilled I get at recognizing my emotional states, I learn to recognize those triggers that you're talking about. And again, all these things take work, right? I mean, it would be great to just say, oh, you know what, here, read this book and you're fixed. Okay. This book will take you a long way to getting fixed, but it's going to take a lot of work on your part, on all of our parts to do it. Just one more quick point on that, Ahmed. A lot of my clients are engineers by training, right? So what I tell them is to look for friction in the system. Okay. When, engineering is all about how do I get energy from point A to point B? How do I increase efficiency from point A to point B? And what slows down the system is friction somewhere. The friction can be anger, it can be shame, it can be, sorrow. So the sooner I get at recognizing the friction in the system, the more effectively I can remove it and go back to being effective.
We're getting very close toward the end of our webinar. We only have 9 minutes to go. So I encourage all our audience to send us questions before we end this webinar. One more question has been sent here on the chat, actually by Amal Mahmoud. She's saying, what are the drawbacks of being mistyped?
Yeah. Yeah, I saw that question in the chat, and I was hoping we would get to it. All right. So first of all, let me say that mistyping happens all the time, right? I know Enneagram teachers who taught the Enneagram for years and then announced that they were a different type than they thought they were. I know Enneagram teachers who I think, yeah, I just don't see that person as the type they see themselves as. So, on the one hand, we want to be careful about making assumptions. So when I'm working with clients, I help them to understand their Enneagram type. And the reality is that I say, here's what I see. I talk to them, I interview them, and then I say, okay, based on our conversation, here's what I'm seeing. But it's only a provisional hypothesis. And as more data comes in, I might change my mind, okay? Because people are complicated. So I think that what we need to do is, the real drawback here is rushing to judgment about our own type or somebody else's type too quickly. It's not a parlor game where we're trying to race to the correct typing of someone or even ourselves, okay? What we want to do is be patient and to observe our behavior, because your type is not what philosophers would call an ontological category, meaning it's not what you are, it's what you do. Okay, you guys have Egyptian passports, I'm assuming. So You are ontologically speaking Egyptian, whereas I am a citizen of the United States. Okay. However, this is about what I'm doing. Am I striving to feel peaceful, or am I striving to feel outstanding? Observe the behaviors, observe the actions, and don't get too caught up in the label. Because what will happen once we stick a label on ourselves or stick a label on somebody else, the confirmation bias kicks in. And all we see are all the reasons why that person is that type. Okay. So the drawbacks of being mistyped is that it can shut off our exploration and observation of ourselves. Okay. But that can also be one of the dangers of the Enneagram. Even if we're typed correctly, we can use it to shut off observations of ourselves. So for me, I think that the less we talk about our Enneagram type, the better off we are. But we should talk about our behaviors and our pains and our joys and the things about ourselves. And then if our Enneagram type is relevant, we bring it into play. Okay? So drawbacks of being mistyped are the same as the drawbacks of being typed correctly. It can limit our view of ourselves, and it can restrict us from seeing the rest of us. Whenever somebody starts telling me about their Enneagram type, I start to get really bored, okay? Because what they're telling me is all these ways in which they are like one out of every other 9 people on the planet. What we can do is to start emphasizing just who we are as human beings. Okay, what is interesting about us? What is not typical of our type? Okay, this is the best way to use the Enneagram. Don't get so hung up on what type we are, but think about what pattern am I seeing? What is happening to me? And what is some way of understanding that? I hope that helped, but it's something I'm very passionate about, but I'm hoping that it was clear.
Yeah, one more question from the floor by Dr. Khaled El-Atawi. And he's thanking us first. A million thanks for this interesting webinar. Thank you, Dr. Khaled. And the question is, may I ask if type can change by time or by moving towards the essence or working on thyself?
Yeah. So I think it depends how we're defining all of those terms. So one way to look at it is that human beings tend to be pretty consistent. I've had the good fortune of being in the same room as the Dalai Lama on 2 occasions. Okay, now it was a big room, so it's not like we were having dinner together or something, but I got to observe him for I think it was probably a total of 14 hours over a few days. The Dalai Lama is a 7. Okay. What I always tell people, if the Dalai Lama, with all the work that he's done on himself, still has an identifiable personality, then I'm not holding on hope for myself of transcending type in some way. Okay. What we can do is become more flexible. We can become less constricted by our habitual patterns. And the idea of changing type is really not the question we should be asking. But the question is, how can I understand the Enneagram to help me recognize my current habitual patterns that are causing me to suffer and causing me to make the people around me suffer? And how can I loosen the grip of those habitual patterns so I have less suffering? Okay. And how can I continually loosen the grip of these habitual patterns so that I recognize them less and less and less in maladaptive ways? Okay, so I don't know if people change type. I've never seen it, but for me, that's not really the focus. It's loosening the bonds of our habitual patterns that is the work we should be doing.
So we're almost toward the end of our webinar. We have 2 minutes left. So I would like to give you, Mario, this opportunity to give us like a final word, like a pearl of wisdom. If you would like to leave us with an important thought that can help help us navigate the current difficult time that we're living?
That's a tall order, Tamara. Enlighten us and make it quick, right?
In just 2 minutes. Yeah.
Right.
Give us the maximum enlightenment possible in 2 minutes. So.
Yeah, 42, right? Now, look, all of this work is about developing compassion for ourselves and compassion for other people. It's about recognizing how we can all get stuck into habitual patterns that were good for us early in life and now sometimes cause us to suffer. And the more attuned we can become to the dynamics of those patterns, the more we're able to become freer from them. I don't know that we ever get completely free, okay? But we can get freer. And that is the work, to continually work on getting just a little bit freer from these habitual patterns each and every day, and to support other people in their efforts to do the same thing, right? That is work that it applies now more than ever, but it's really it's the root of all spiritual work. Okay, that's the best I've got.
Very wise. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much,
Thank
Mario.
you. Thank you very much, Mario, for allowing us.
My pleasure. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a joy to talk to you.
Yeah. Thanks for Diwan as well, and Amal for allowing this to happen.
Thank you so
very much.
Thank you so much. It was really very, very interesting and engaging, and you feel like we've learned a lot, all of us. There is one question we missed. Is it the chat? Do you mind just answering it, or do you prefer we send it privately? Okay, yeah. Rania is saying, how can you observe yourself and also understand what is happening? As for her, it's two different things.
Observe yourself. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?
Yes. How can you observe yourself and also understand what is happening? For her, she feels that there are two different things.
Yeah, so I'm not quite sure what she means specifically about what is happening. So it could be about directing attention, right? Am I looking inward or am I looking outward? Okay, all right, so I got it. Yeah, so I think we need to, they are two different things, right? And I think we need to learn to be able to switch, right? To flip back and forth. One of the challenges that 4s have is their switch stays internal, right? Other types, the switch stays external. And we have to learn to have it as a two-way conversation. What's happening in me, what's happening around me, what's happening in me, what's happening around me. So rather than see them as two competing activities, it's just two things we need to keep looking at, right? What's going on out there. I also think it's really critical for people to solicit feedback from people that they trust and who they believe care about them, right? Very often we assume that we know how we're coming across. We assume that we know how other people are perceiving us. So getting feedback from other people is really an important growth step, okay? So I highly recommend that as a way of helping to recognize what's happening there, okay? But again, see it as a switch. I need to turn the mirror, inward. I need to aim the looking glass outward.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. Thank you so much, Mario. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Amal, do you want to make the announcement again about the code and
Yes. In the beginning of the chat, there is a promo code that people can use to purchase the book Awareness to Action with a 15% discount. It's valid for 1 week from all the branches or through the website.
And I'm sorry, can I just put in a plug for a couple of upcoming events that we have going on?
Yes,
So,
awareness, that would be great, yes.
Yeah, so you can go to awareness-to-action.com, and we have a series of free webinars coming up June 22nd to 26th It's 15 free webinars over 5 days on applications of the Awareness to Action Enneagram. That's free, and it's going to be delivered by a diverse group of consultants who use this system. And the other thing is that we do have the Module 1 certification program coming up at the end of June. So feel free to reach out to us for more information or get information from awareness-to-action.com.
Yes, great. Do we have a link to share with them ready, or
I can share
send
the link. I can share the link with you, Amar, so you can post it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I'll also
so
just
much.
say, if you give me 10 more seconds, thank you so much for having me. It's given me my little taste of Egypt, and particularly spending some time with some dear friends. And I can't wait to see you all in person again someday.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Bye bye.
All right.
All right.
Okay.
Bye
Bye bye. See you
All
soon.
right. Bye bye, everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye.
أمل we can stay. أنت لسه موجودة يا أمل ولا خرجتي؟ طيب. شكرا يا جماعة.